you look at what has happened with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, you will realize it is a story of pillage, plunder and rape over the last 70, 80 years of an unprecedented proportion, to an extent that never ever happened in Indian Kashmir, even at its absolute worst. To be fair, all the elections in Pakistan are rigged. So that is why I say this is a microcosm of everything that has gone wrong in Pakistan. And what is the standard response to a popular uprising? Crushed. They did this in Bangladesh, they did this in Balochistan, they did this in Sindh, they did this in the Northwest Frontier Province, which is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and now they're doing it in Kashmir. And this is not the first time they're doing it in Kashmir. They keep doing this in Kashmir. And it ostensibly has a prime minister. Look at the language used. In India, protesters are shot.
Right.
In Pakistan, the New York Times and Washington Post, 24 people have died. People die every day. That is not news. How did these 24 people die?
The Pakistan army was told to fire the guns.
Because that area is very famous for its apricots. I suspect they were standing under apricot trees and an apricot fell on their head and they died. This is the kind of trashy journalism. Fine, you may be of a different political opinion in India, but look at the way the CJP protests were dealt with here, as opposed to outright firing and killing and kidnappings and torture happening in POK. So for all these, let's not call it POK, we'll call it POJ. It's Pakistan-occupied Jammu.
Okay.
If you can't see the contrast there, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And if you keep comparing India to Pakistan after that, there's something hugely wrong with you.
I was listening to a Pakistani expert on Al Jazeera only a few days ago, and he said the protests are being fueled in POJK further, seeing the development on the Indian side of Kashmir. Okay.
Oh, they're very jealous. They're very jealous because now, you know the number, before they went influencers going there and making reels and things like that. They see those reels. They see what's happening out there. They're looking at the living standards. You know, this notion that India was poor and Pakistan was rich. We eat chicken every day. They eat vegetables every day. That's been crumbling.
Seven years after the revocation of Article 370, Kashmir and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir appear to be on very different trajectories. Yet, while global headlines continue to scrutinize India, report of protests, brutal police crackdowns, and media restrictions in POJK receive far less attention. So is there a double standard in how the world views the two sides of the line of control? Joining us to unpack the politics, history, and the media narrative is Abhijit Iyer Mitra. I'm Aditi Prasad, and you're watching episode 2 of Why Should You Care? Now, Abhijit, let me start with the most obvious question. Why should any average Indian sitting in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore care about what's happening in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir?
Because, you know, so many Indians tend to have this misplaced affection for Pakistan. वो हमारे बिछड़े हुए भाई हैं. You know, this whole notion of Punjabiyat that I.K. Gujral used to do so much. This whole thing that, you know, we can talk to them. And this notion that, you know, which every Indian liberal uses in the press, which is every time something goes wrong here, we're only marginally better than Pakistan or we're worse than Pakistan. You look at what has happened with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, you will realize it is a story of pillage, plunder and rape over the last 70, 80 years of an unprecedented proportion, to an extent that never ever happened in Indian Kashmir, even at its absolute worst. And that is why you need to care.
Pakistan-occupied Kashmir of today, is that a window into how the rest of Pakistan functions? Or, you know, is POJK earmarked separately, ignored, plundered, as you're saying, one of the terms? Does that reflect on the rest of Pakistan, or is POJK a separate story? What's the story going on there?
It is a microcosm of everything Pakistan, right? And yet at the same time, it is slightly different. Now, let me just break this down first. You know, when the British sold Kashmir to the Dogra Raja, we have to understand it was 4 very disparate regions that got forcibly combined together. There is this side of the mountain range, which is the Valley of Kashmir. There is Ladakh. Then there is Gilgit-Baltistan, where Skardu and things come, which went off to Pakistan, which is the northern tip. And then there is this side of the mountain range, including Jammu, which is the Rajma eating belt. So Vazwan cuisine, for example, Gushtaba Rishta, which is what most people know about Kashmir, ends with the Kashmir Valley. The cuisine of Jammu is Rajma Chawal, they're the Rajma Chawal Dogra types. And that entire belt extends up to, say, Mirpur Khas. Mirpur Khas are practically Punjabis. I mean, Dogri in some tellings is sort of a variant of Punjabi, though Dogri speakers get very upset when you say that, but it's generally considered one of those. But now what happens here is they've got the Dogri Punjabi belt in that sense. They don't really have a Kashmiri as we understand the ethnic word Kashmiri. They don't have any of that. And they've got Gilgit Baltistan, which is Shias and Nurbak Shias. You look at the population replacement that has happened in Gilgit Baltistan, it is insane. The Shias and Nurbak Shias have become a minority. It is full on colonization by Pakistan, to the point where there is no local identity left except the way these Chinese do when you go to Tibet. They've completely sinified Tibet. There's only these little freak show, for display dollhouses like the Jokhang Monastery and the completely fake and restored Potala Palace. I mean, you go there and I was like, why did I come here? Because our monasteries, Hemis Gompa and things like that,
They're
are
far more
far.
authentic.
You can look at the quality. Each statue of the Buddha out there has real emeralds, real rubies. In China, you can see they're all plastic. They're not even, they could have at least made it in metal. No, they make it in plastic. Right? So they've turned Gilgit Baltistan is what Tibet is to China, Gilgit Baltistan is to Pakistan. With the southern part, which is to say occupied Jammu of Pakistan, the first thing they did was built the dam out there, which evicted this whole bunch of people called Mirpuris from Mirpur Khas. This happened shortly after independence. Curiously enough, despite being displaced, they all moved to Britain and they've become the strongest pro-Pakistan lobby out there. They're called the Mirpur lobby, and they are the most vitriolic, venomous people you'll ever come across out there. Now, you would assume with this much patriotism for Pakistan, Pakistan would have at least done something good for these people. No, they don't really have a say in national politics at all. If you think Sindhis are overshadowed by the Punjabis, if the Pashtuns are overshadowed by the Punjabis, or if the Baloch especially are overshadowed, it is nothing compared to what so-called Kashmir, I mean, if it can really be called Kashmir, let's call it occupied Jammu really. What occupied Jammu has faced and what occupied Gilgit-Baltistan has faced. No real representation, no elections. I mean, look, to be fair, all the elections in Pakistan are rigged. So that is why I say this is a microcosm of everything that has gone wrong in Pakistan. And what is the standard response to a popular uprising? Crush it. They did this in Bangladesh, they did this in Balochistan, they did this in Sindh, they did this in the Northwest Frontier Province, which is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and now they're doing it in Kashmir. And this is not the first time they're doing it in Kashmir. They keep doing this in Kashmir, and it ostensibly has a prime minister.
Right. And that very same prime minister is now alleging that the local elections that were held there were actually, which was the reason for the recent uprising and protests over the last 2 months, that election is rigged.
Now, it may be rigged. This can be like EVM kind of story in India. When you win when Prashant Kishore wins the election, it is democracy has won. When Prashant Kishore lost the election the last time before the bypoll, it was EVMs were rigged.
EVMs, yeah.
Remember, or votes. I forget what exactly it said. It was either EVMs were rigged or votes were stolen, something like that. He said. So this could also be that. Except we know in Pakistan every single time elections get rigged. Nothing more obvious than what happened in the last general election. You remember the PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan's party. They were leading by huge. They had to contest as independents because the party had been banned. They were leading by huge margins. All the counting centers were shut down. All the media was put off air. Internet was cut off. And suddenly, when counting numbers are given out at 4 a.m. in the morning, lo and behold, PTI has lost every single seat.
And
Why are we surprised?
And Imran Khan has been in jail for the last 3 years. Even like last 2 months, the kind of bloodshed that has happened in that, 90 people dead in, and Pakistan army brutally firing at protesters. The coverage is like one story, two story, and when Al Jazeera
But
forget
it's not even the story. Look at the language used. In India, protesters are shot.
right.
In Pakistan, the New York Times and Washington Post, 24 people have died. People die every day. That is not news. How did these 24 people die? Did they just
The
they were
Pakistan army was told to fire the guns.
because that area is very famous for its apricots. I suspect they were standing under apricot trees and an apricot fell on their head and they died. This is the kind of trashy journalism. But remember, there used to be that creature Annie Gowan in Islamabad. She used to literally publish handouts that the army used to give her. They know that the army can deport them. They can do so with impunity. And they have done so with impunity in the past. And for them, it is very essential to maintain their status there in Pakistan. And to be fair, if you toe the line, the kind of access and VIP treatment you get in Pakistan is insane. Here, a New York Times or Washington Post correspondent won't even get a meeting with a director at the MEMA. They'll probably get a meeting with the doorman outside his house, but nothing more than that. There, you'll get taken up right to the prime minister whenever you want and things like that, right? Uh, they want to maintain its fundamental access corruption. It is cushiness corruption. It's a quid pro quo of a sort. Whereas here, they can wag their tails as much as they want. Fine, you may be of a different political opinion in India, but look at the way the CJP protests were dealt with here, as opposed to outright firing and killing and kidnappings and torture happening in POK. So for all these, let's not call it POK, we'll call it POJ. It's Pakistan-occupied Jammu.
Okay.
And if you can't see the contrast there, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And if you keep comparing India to Pakistan after that, there's something hugely wrong with you.
If anything has to be compared, let's talk about the development in Kashmir post Article 370 revocation. Why is that not talked about as much as the somebody hits someone, some protest happens, even if 10 people are standing there, that gets written about like there's a huge protest.
So the way these people, Washington Post, Guardian, New York Times, put it is, the classic wife basher logic. Every husband who gives his wife a black eye says, I beat you up because I love you. And this is the classic thing that these people gaslight you with. They say, you're a democracy. We care so much more about you. That is why we inspect you with we hold you up to a higher standard. And this is what every husband who beats his wife says, you are my wife. I don't care what that, if the tea was too hot when I went to that house. But if the tea is too hot in my house, you are the Saraswati of my house. Therefore, I beat you up.
According to your sources, what's exactly happening in POK right now? Why, there is this brutal police crackdown. It continues. What prompted it? Everyone knows. The JAAC. But what's happening on the ground now?
But remember, the JAAC was the trigger. It's always been, this web of not even having the freedoms that, say, even the Baloch have. Baloch you can organize as kind of non-formalized discrimination. Here, by virtue of having your own prime minister and things, it's almost a semi-formalized discrimination, right? In terms of, tell me one Pakistani Jammuite who is in any position of power. Even token.
Correct.
Zero, right? So it has been compounding. Even your mobile phones, you're not allowed to use them in that area around the Indian border. Whereas here in the Indian border, you can go right up to the wire fence and take your mobile phone. It says, how many photos do you see on Instagram? It says photography not allowed and everybody here will be. And when the army guy comes and tells you politely, अबे देखता नहीं है कि इधर ये है, उसे जानता है मेरा बाप कौन है. Standard every part of India is जानता नहीं मेरा बाप कौन है. the kind of restrictions you face out there, because see, they understand that mobile phones are a very powerful tool of open source intelligence in locating. And contrary to popular belief, there are no terror training camps. There are disaggregated. They may go to that compound that we hit in the first day of Operation Sindoor. The people who lived there would have only been about 10%. The remaining 90% are always kept dispersed in different paths. Okay. So they don't want filming to happen out there. So imagine not having a normal escape via Instagram or Facebook, even. Right. There's always a sort of military emergency in that entire border area. Your provision of everything is very expensive because it has to come up by trucks out there. Much, much more expensive. What are you going to do? So imagine the petrol shortage, the electricity shortage in the rest of Pakistan, how much more compound it is in this particular part of Pakistan. So a lot of things compounding up. And that is what happened in POJK. Now, the response of the Pakistani state, they've only ever had one response. In Durandar also, see, there was civil strife in Karachi. In India also, we had I think people might have forgotten, people who are very young people like you might have forgotten that, when us fuddy-duddy uncles were growing up in the 80s and 90s, Bombay used to be full-on gang war.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
were shootouts and things like that. Cops were caught in compromising position. In each gang had its own purchased cops kind of thing, and there used to be fights between cops on behalf of gangs. We sorted out without any military operation. It was sorted out slowly over a period of time, but the Indian states sorted it out gently with a light hand, no heavy touch. The Pakistanis don't have a concept of light touch. Their only response is always, historically, has been go in, torture, kill, kidnap. And that is what you see in Dhurandhar. Layari, ultimately, there was a full on military operation to, rid the place. It was like, uh, at its peak, that operation, it looked like videos from what was done to Golden Temple in 1984.
You mentioned Dhurandhar, and therefore I can't help but talk about Shehbaz Sharif's advisor, who just went on, record yesterday saying that whatever's happening in POJK is largely the hand of the Indian state is behind it, because they did not want elections to happen there. And therefore, this was Operation Sindoor 2.0, which by holding elections, we stopped.
Yeah, look, they blame us for everything. You remember Pahalgam itself was a response to that train hijacking and killing of almost 200 Pakistani troops in Balochistan. They blamed us for that also. And that is why you remember when he said that, I'd already said we better brace for an attack. And
Exactly.
a month or two later, the attack happened.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with that last terror attack last month in Pakistan. Remember, there was some big Baloch
There was a suicide attack.
which they blamed on us. This one also they've blamed on us. So, I congratulate RAW. RAW is such a all-powerful organization that they are able to, start up things wherever they want, whenever they want. I never realized RAW was this competent. That's not been my experience with RAW, but if that's the Pakistani experience with RAW, I'm happy to claim that, I am the student and RAW is the master. Yeah.
Let's talk about governance in POJK. Has POJK always sort of gotten a stepmotherly treatment compared to richer Pakistani provinces like Punjab and Sindh?
Sindh has never been treated very well. There has been huge discrimination even with regards to Sindh versus Punjab. The pecking order is Punjab number one in all government schemes and everything. Number two becomes Northwest Frontier Province, because even though in terms of population they may be less, in terms of army representation they account for almost 30% of the officer corps. But mind you, they don't have any Pashto loyalties per se. They have to be culturally Punjabi. They are not Pashto Pakistanis, they are Pashto Punjabis.
So, Punjab, NWFP?
Punjab, NWFP, then Sindh, and Sindh to the extent maybe 15 to 20% max. Okay. even less than that. Some estimates are about 10% of government jobs and schemes and things like that. And Balochistan and occupied Jammu and Gilgit-Baltistan account for about 1% each. That bad.
When JAC came together, this is the Joint Awami League sort of coming together. And these are just civilians who came together for a common cause. Initially, they talked about uh, Artica Bhao, to lower prices of flour, to lower prices of power.
It always starts with these small things. The Pakistani state never solves it at that level. Okay. And what ends up happening is Mangla Dam, which is, I think it was Mangla Dam that was built to evacuate Mirpur Khas. That is why the Mirpuris went, is right there. Here when power plants are built, a certain amount of the power is kept subsidized for local usage, just to ameliorate, all the ill will of land acquisition and things like that. You still haven't learned that out there. When you ask them about the standard question, I don't know if you realize this, when you ask them about wheat prices, when an Indian goes there and asks them about atta or maida, there is actually a hadith against maida. Do you know that?
Wow.
Yeah, Muslims should not use maida. They should only use atta. So very, very religious Muslims will not eat cake because it's got maida. Anyway, so what ends up happening here is, especially when Indian journalists go there and ask, they will point to the fact that Indians don't have any money. They only eat vegetables. And here we don't need roti, we eat chicken every day. Do you know why? It's actually, and Indians don't know how to counter this. It's actually really sinister. All your vitamins actually come from the veggies. All your essential micronutrients come from the veggies. They don't have money for flour. They don't have money for veggies. Do you know chicken is actually cheaper than vegetables? You keep chickens on the roof. Most dirt poor Pakistani houses keep chickens on the roof. It's filthy dirty because chickens are dirty birds. They keep laying eggs. They keep getting fertilized. So every 30 days, you get a chicken to eat. It grows up for 30 days and you get a chicken to eat. So it's actually cheaper as opposed to, say, growing cauliflower or cabbage, which takes 3-4 months to grow. That is the growing season. So you may not have your basic staples, but they'll show eating consumption of protein as some great achievement showing that they're actually better off.
That's happening in POJK. Balochistan is another tinderbox with a lot of resentment there. There is, of course, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa we've spoken about before. And then, of course, there are the TTP militants on the other end, pressing from the north down. You think Pakistan is a lot of people have spoken about it, on the verge of collapse, because if it was collapse, then it would have happened, I believe, many moons ago, given the kind of insurgencies they're facing from every angle.
Look, ever since I was born, when the tides turned, before India used to be the poor neighbor, Pakistan used to be the rich neighbor. That changed in the 1990s. I've been hearing Pakistan is collapsing next year. Pakistan is collapsing this year. Actually, in end August, they will collapse. I've heard this every year, every month of every year for the last 20 years, and Pakistan has not collapsed. Okay. I think we tend to forget sometimes how effective brute force can be, especially if there are no limits and if the leadership is smart enough to be able to turn a Trump from the way they turned Trump was brilliant, right? I mean, diplomatically brilliant. When you're able to do that and get away with all this crap, people vastly underestimate the effectiveness of coercion. There is no Indian army waiting to help the Mukti Bahini out there. There is no Afghan army really waiting, even though the Northwest Frontier province is on fire. They're not really going to do much. Ultimately, even when you talk about, say, financial collapse triggering a political collapse, we tend to forget, and this is a point, Pakistanis tend to be very disingenuous, but this is one of those more genuine points. They're like, you keep confusing, Abhijit, you keep confusing the fact that, fine, the formal economy is collapsing, but we've got a massive informal economy, right? Which you don't account for, whatever. And the way the financial markets work is, especially when you've got nuclear weapons, especially when you've got a highly radicalized army, nobody wants to see the effects of a collapse on you. So international financial institutions will keep pouring money in order to prevent that collapse in the hope of recovering something you may never get back. Right? Does the system ultimately crack? Possibly, but sometimes not. And therefore, the security system is invested in Pakistan. They cannot allow a nuclear state to collapse. Now, the Indian counter argument to that is, well, the Soviet Union collapsed. And the Western counter argument to that is, yes, look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look what happened in Moldova. Look what happened in Moldova, by the way, is exactly what happened in Ukraine. Except Ukraine and Russia did it together to Moldova, to Transnistria. Nobody wants to talk about that right now. What happened in Azerbaijan, Armenia, what happened in Chechnya, etc., etc. But I think this is one of those things where India is right, and we should just, kick the bucket and see what happens, because it can't be
We
worse
can't be
than
kicking
now.
the bucket because they have China standing right there with them, and they have the Trump.
To be
as of
fair,
now.
China is not the one helping them. The Chinese are very upset with them financially because of what happened to the Pakistan-China economic corridor. It is the West helping them at the moment. It is international financial institutions, because this nuclear lobby, they are very strong in this determination of loans. And all Pakistan has to do is, our nuclear arsenal will get into the hands of non-state actors. So,
That's the most scariest proposition for anybody.
so, Augustus, Emperor Augustus, he started the fire service in Rome. And 90% of the fires in Rome were started by the fire service because they used to get extra money for actually putting out a fire. This is like that. You create the loonies yourself, then you claim the loonies are going to take it, so you get money from.
So what's the end game? I mean, Asim Munir, he's obviously ruling with a very heavy hand, a heavy fist. Crazy crackdown in POK. Some of the visuals we can't even put out on screen for fear of community guidelines kicking in, because bodies literally piled up on streets. So what happens in POJK next? And what should India do? Because India's already called that election a farce.
Look, there's nothing we can do physically. There's nothing the international community wants to do. Washington Post, Guardian, and New York Times are complicit with the government in covering it up or normalizing it.
Pakistan has said they've curbed media availability.
But even without that, Al Jazeera always acted like Al Qaeda. They're the media arm of Al Qaeda, right? So there's no difference. I certainly don't make a difference between the two. There's a reason Osama bin Laden used to send his exclusives only to Al Jazeera, and there is a reason NATO only used to bomb Al Jazeera offices and kill Al Jazeera correspondents. Now, set that aside. Realistically, what can happen? Nothing. The people of
It's just going to
Pakistan-occupied Jammu have no hope. It is just going to continue. We're not in a position, or nor do we have the willingness to do anything about it, except rhetorically. The rest of the world doesn't give a damn.
I was listening to a Pakistani expert on Al Jazeera only a few days ago, and he said the protests are being fueled in POJK further, seeing the development on the Indian side of Kashmir.
Oh, they're very jealous. They're very jealous because now, the number, before they went influencers going there and making reels and things like that. They see those reels. They see what's happening out there. They're looking at the living standards, this notion that India was poor and Pakistan was rich. We eat chicken every day. They eat vegetables every day. That's been crumbling. So understand that horrible Indian reel maker that we detest so much
has also reached out across the LOC and made them see that and compare. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us today. We, I think, spoke quite a bit. So viewers, nothing, at least what we can see is that if someone has followed Western headlines over the past several years, the biggest facts really coming out of those headlines are about the Jammu and Kashmir, but really very little about Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which is boiling and burning right now. And as Abhijit says, no hope for any improvements in the near future either. Stay tuned. We'll come back to you next week with another episode of Why Should You Care?